It's always a pleasure to have Nyabingi with us, and I am so proud to get a moment to introduce Marcy Winograd. We have stood shoulder to shoulder for decades here in Southern California in this struggle for peace and justice. Marcy has worked inside the system and outside the system. She was a candidate for Congress. She advanced an extraordinary campaign articulating issues that others don't talk about when they run for office. Meanwhile, she's been instrumental in many issues in Southern California and across the state and the country, and is active with Code Pink. So I will turn the floor over to our speakers.
Thank you so much for that warm and gracious invitation. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I first want to turn it over to Nyabingi, who I thank and am deeply grateful for, because it was Nyabingi who called me and drew attention to the issue and the stance taken by the very courageous Archbishop in Santa Fe. So Nyabingi, why don't you say a few words?
All right. Greetings to everyone, and I'm very much appreciate this forum, and to emaborate some on what Steve said, give you a little bit of information on my background. I've been working closely with the Democratic Party for a number of years. I managed Kamala Harris's campaign for Attorney General 10 years ago, where she beat Steve Cooley in that razor-thin margin. And I have been aligned with the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, which is how I know Marcy. We've had a PDA-LA chapter for quite a while. And being a progressive Democrat is very painful for me, because first of all, I don't think that there should be progressive Democrats. Democrats should be progressive naturally. And another thing that pains me is the lack of Black leadership in the anti-war and peace movement. And so I've been nagging Marcy about that for a while. I feel like Barbara Lee has been pretty much out there on her own in California as a California rep. And now she has the squad, which is really changing the game in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. So I'm starting to see some openings. For a living, I work in addiction treatment, especially for the homeless. And I've been doing a lot of work on the opioid epidemic, and trying to get more medications for addiction treatment, especially for those using fentanyl and methamphetamines. And so yeah, what I want to do is show an 11-minute clip from Democracy Now! Where Archbishop Wester and Father Greer spoke, and then we can go into conversation after that.
And I think if I could just say a few words before we show the clip. Thank you for arranging that. Our purpose today is to engage in planning to advance the message within the Catholic Church for denuclearization, and to appeal to the Archbishop of Los Angeles, Archbishop Gomez, who is also the president of the Conference of Catholic Bishops. And there are 70 million Catholics in the United States, 4 million in Los Angeles, to take a leadership role, particularly at this very crucial and sensitive time, frightening time, to say that we must advance verifiable nuclear disarmament agreements. And we urge all of our followers, all spiritual people, all people of Los Angeles, to not participate in the nuclear weapons industry, because it is all about threatening life on Earth as we know. So with that, I turn it back to you, Nyabingi, for the film.
All right. So this is a YouTube video. Sometimes it's a little challenging to get the sound up. So if you don't hear the sound, let me know.
When you go to the share screen, there's a little button that you can click to share your computer sound. Make sure that's
okay. Oh yeah, I see a share sound. Thanks, Mike. I never knew that. Hold on. Okay, everybody see that?
Yeah.
Statecraft. We'd like Bill Hartung to remain with us now as we look at the escalating tension between Russia and the United States, the world's two largest nuclear superpowers, coming at a time when the Biden administration is preparing to release an updated outline of U.S. nuclear weapons policy, a document known as the Nuclear Posture Review. A number of disarmament groups and scientists have called on President Biden to take action to reduce the U.S. nuclear stockpile. In December, nearly 700 scientists and engineers, including 21 Nobel laureates, called on Biden to cut the U.S. nuclear arsenal by a third and pledge never to use nuclear weapons first. In addition, 60 groups recently issued a joint statement calling for the elimination of the hundreds of U.S. intercontinental ballistic nuclear missiles now armed and on hair-trigger alert. William Hartung is still with us. He's closely followed U.S. nuclear weapons policy for decades. Can you talk about where this stands? This certainly doesn't bode well for reducing nuclear weapons, the conflict between NATO and Russia and the position the U.S. has taken.
No, that's correct. I mean, it should be the reverse. I think anytime there's nuclear tensions between nuclear armed powers, it should make us step back and rethink what U.S. nuclear strategy and U.S. nuclear procurement is. But I think, unfortunately, in the short term, the tensions with Russia are going to make it harder in Washington to get people to entertain changes in our nuclear policy.
And Bill, former Secretary of Defense William Perry once called ICBMs, quote, some of the most dangerous weapons in the world. Why would even a defense secretary say that? Well, you know, he's been involved in the nuclear field for decades himself, and he understands that in a crisis, you know, if the president thinks we're being attacked with nuclear weapons, he or she would have minutes to decide whether to launch the ICBMs. So that greatly increases the possibility of an accidental nuclear war based on a false alarm. And the Cold War period was replete with false alarms, potential nuclear accidents. So it's something that actually could happen. And so the notion is, if you get rid of those ICBMs, you reduce the risk of accidental nuclear war. And it's a first step towards a more rational nuclear policy. And that's why 60 groups, led by groups like Roots Action, Just Foreign Policy, Peace Action, Physicians for Social Responsibility, Beyond the Bomb, and others are calling for the elimination of ICBMs as a first step towards a more sane and less risky nuclear weapons policy on the part of the United States.
I wanted to turn to the Archbishop of New Mexico, John Wester of Santa Fe, who recently called for the abolition of nuclear weapons around the globe. In a pastoral letter, Wester says, quote, "To love our enemies means we have to begin the process of ending our preparations to kill them and doing everything we can not to harm them, but to actively love them, including the people of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and others." Archbishop Wester spoke to reporters in Santa Fe earlier this month.
The Catholic Church has a long history of speaking out against nuclear weapons. Indeed, the Vatican was the first nation-state to sign and ratify the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The Archdiocese of Santa Fe has a special role to play in advocating for nuclear disarmament, given the Los Alamos and Sandia nuclear weapons laboratories and the nation's largest repository of nuclear weapons at the Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque.
To talk more about Archbishop John Wester's letter, we're joined by Father John Deere, who advised the Archbishop on the letter. Father Deere led a campaign for 15 years in New Mexico calling for the disarmament of nuclear laboratories at Los Alamos. He now lives in California, where he's the executive director of the Beatitudes Center. Father John Deere, it's great to have you with us. We're also with Bill Hartung of the Quincy Institute. If you could talk about the significance of this, 50-page huge pastoral letter calling for denuclearization of the world.
Thank you so much, Amy, for having me on. And this has never happened before. This is really good news. It's an official document in the church calling for the total abolition of nuclear weapons. I think it's the most important document in U.S. Catholic Church history, and many people are now saying that. As you know, the ban treaty has been so blocked and ignored consciously and deliberately by U.S. mainstream media, but so has Pope Francis's dramatic calls in the last few years for nuclear disarmament, including at Hiroshima, has been totally ignored, especially by the churches here in the United States. 2 weeks ago, Archbishop Wester of New Mexico issued this massive statement, which is an official church document, responding to both of these and issuing it in time for the anniversary of the ban treaty and Biden's upcoming review of nuclear weapons. And as I said, this has never happened before. What he's highlighting is that Pope Francis has changed everything in the church, and it's been a long time coming. So for decades and decades, the churches the Catholic Church has allowed deterrence, calling it morally acceptable, which some of us have found just outrageous. Because, it's not really about deterrence. The U.S. war machine is about first strike nuclear warfare and making a lot of money on preparations for that. Francis has wiped all of that out overnight. And people need to realize that, and says now deterrence, the mere possession of these weapons, is totally immoral, evil, sinful, blasphemous. The words that Francis used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki are shocking 2.5 years ago. And Archbishop Wester has responded to this. And it's really the first mainstream response in our culture to the call of Pope Francis and the ban treaty. That's why it gives me so much hope. People like Daniel Berrigan, Dorothy Day, Thomas Merton dreamed of living to see something like this. And if it could get picked up by ordinary people across the country in the churches and the religious communities to start pushing on nuclear disarmament, this would be really hopeful and helpful. What Archbishop Wester does is says, I want to start a conversation in the United States. We have to put the question in existence of nuclear weapons front and center. So he's really taking Pope Francis's message to the people of New Mexico and the whole country and saying, we've got to deal with this, and because it's so urgent. And in the first sentence of, you may wonder, Amy, where did he come from? Why did he do this? No other bishop has responded like this, and there have been very few pastoral letters ever in our history. His first sentence was he went to Hiroshima a couple of years ago, and it's so powerful because he describes being so moved there by what he saw. And this is typical in New Mexico. 2 days later, he's back in Santa Fe. He had guests coming. He took them to the New Mexico Museum of History, and he's standing before this fabulous display about the glories of the Manhattan Project, Los Alamos, the first nuclear bomb that was built to destroy Hiroshima and then Nagasaki, and all the bombs since. And he had just been in Hiroshima, and he had a real change of heart. And then he started studying Pope Francis. So he outlines all of this, how the church under Francis has radically shifted. The other thing Francis is doing is now Francis, for the first time since the early church in 1700 years, is calling all Catholics not only to disarm and work for disarmament, but to practice nonviolence, like Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and Thich Nhat Hanh, of course, like Jesus. And Archbishop Wester takes that up too, saying the goal here is universal love, love our enemies, all of us becoming nonviolent, working for a new world of nonviolence. And then he goes very seriously into what's happening today. That's why I urge people to read it, and it's free. It's on the internet. Just look up the Archdiocese of Santa Fe. He walks through the reality of nuclear weapons,
Father Dear, if I can,
and so forth. Yeah.
Father Dear, if I can, I'd like to just bring in Bill Hartung. I wanted to ask Bill if you could react to the Archbishop's call, and also your thoughts about the importance of this coming in from New Mexico and New Mexico's role in terms of American nuclear weapons.
Well, I think the moral call is really kind of what needs to inject any movement from nuclear arms reduction or elimination. And so in that sense, I think, Reverend Deere has kind of eloquently spoken to the importance of it. New Mexico is part of the nuclear warhead complex. You've got the Los Alamos and Sandia labs that develop and do engineering for nuclear weapons. Those labs have lobbied heavily against things like a comprehensive test ban. You've got a broader nuclear complex that includes places like the bases in Montana, Wyoming, and North Dakota that have intercontinental ballistic missiles. The senators from those states have worked overtime in an ICBM coalition to stop any reductions, any changes in ICBM land-based nuclear missile policies, any reductions in spending, including spending on a new missile built by Northrop Grumman that could cost $264 billion over its lifetime. So I think at the same time you have this moral call, you have this kind of other pressure, kind of what I've called the nuclear industrial complex, a subset of the military industrial complex that has made it particularly hard in Washington to rethink nuclear policy, make changes, reduce spending on these things.
Well, William Hartung, we want to thank you for being with us, research fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, and ask Father John Deere, longtime peace activist and Catholic priest, to stay with us when we come back.
Naibingi, did you want to follow up with a few words?
Yeah. So that is so inspiring. It's inspiring for me, and then also it also brings up the issue of fact being stranger than fiction, because the more I think about the logic behind nuclear weapons, who in their right minds would even think of having these things? I mean, all of Biden and all of these leaders, they have kids, they have grandkids, they want their kids to live in a world fearing these destructive forces. So a couple of things I want to open up the conversation with. I know Father Chris has a lot to, well, I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say. And also, I had mentioned to Marcy that we need to go after these defense contractors. Northrop is right here in El Segundo. It wouldn't take much for us to go over there and do a Occupy Black Lives Matter. I just think we need to get militant. They're militant, so we need to get militant. That's the only way we're going to defeat them. Doing nothing is not working. And then also, I'd like to get more of the LA progressive organizations like the Black Brown Clergy Alliance, the Black Jewish Coalition, get all of these organizations involved. Reverend Lawson, I'd like to see more, I'd like for ICUJP to get more signatures for this letter. So that's what I have to say for now. But you can add, Marcy.
Yes. Thank you, Naibingi. Excellent. Yeah. I wrote this letter, ran it by Naibingi prior to the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So it absolutely needs to be updated. I don't think it needs to be radically different, but I would appreciate it perhaps if Chris would want to update it, or I can send some suggestions. And then I think I agree with Naibingi, to get more people signing on would be good, though. I think principally what I would like to see is this group organize a meeting, could be a small delegation, representative of the organization, meeting with Archbishop Gomez to engage him, perhaps show some of the film that Naibingi just shared with us from Democracy Now!, and engage him in how the Catholic Church, with, again, 70 million followers, and he's the president of the Conference of Catholic Bishops, could engage and change the public discourse on the urgency of signing on to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, on advancing verifiable nuclear disarmament agreements, mindful that the United States has abandoned 3 of them, 1 under Bush, 2 under Trump, and almost 3 with Trump, almost abandoning when it was about to lapse when he left office, the START Treaty. And right now, it's obvious to anyone watching that these weapons are a threat to humanity, and hopefully this invasion will be over soon. We will have peace. We will negotiate. And then we can advance nuclear disarmament. And I would like to see Archbishop Gomez deliver, I don't know if you call them sermons in the Catholic Church, but to his congregations, urge all archbishops to be advancing this message and to really get behind the call for denuclearization, because this is the most urgent existential threat. Climate catastrophe is also a threat, but we see right now that this is a sword hanging over us. So thank you very much. And I would really like to hear your thoughts on how we can advance this.
Let me structure this a little bit. We'll turn to Chris in a few minutes. First of all, both Nyabinghi and Marcy so far have other archbishops and other Catholic leaders signed on to John Wester's call?
I don't know the answer.
Not that I know of. Well, I think one of the biggest sells on this to me is that Pope Francis, this is an edict from Pope Francis, so it shouldn't be a hard sell to get Archbishop Gomez to sign on. So I think that's really what we need, Archbishop Gomez to step up
to be the leader.
Yeah.
Right. And also, the Vatican became the first nation state to sign and ratify the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which has been signed over 80 countries. So the question I would put to these archbishops is, how are we supporting the call of the Vatican, right? How are we spreading this message?
Let me turn to Chris. Chris, broadly, if you have other remarks, and I saw some of your comments in the chat, on the Catholic Church's approach to nuclear weapons broadly, your involvement in some of those things, and then more strategically, assuming this letter is revised to some extent to take account of current headlines, how would you see approaching Archbishop Gomez? Oh, Chris said he's having some issues. He looks frozen there. Chris, your input on this is so important. I don't know if you want to come in by phone, go back to the ICUJP invitation and join us on your cell phone. Sometimes that signal is more consistent.
You can also try cutting his.
Oh, here he is. Wait.
Okay.
So I'm going to go out of my if I cut out the video, it might help my internet.
It does. Go right ahead.
Yeah. So I think there's a question of, I appreciate the letter and I have no problem supporting it. We can tweak it a little bit, but I think we need to think strategically. When I was a newly ordained priest, the bishops in '83 wrote a peace letter, but it was a group of women, to pick up on what Carol Francis said. It was a group of women from various churches that came to the door and said, what are you going to do? And I'm wondering if we might do that by organizing interfaith leaders, women and men, to ask for this appointment with the Archbishop, but to say, we're inspired by this letter, because I think it is inspiring. Many other churches haven't made this bold statement. Our friendly, wonderful Quakers and other peace churches have been ahead of us on this. But I think we might need to strategically figure out who's going to be in that meeting. And it might be worth a meeting first with the Archbishop of Santa Fe. And I think I can make that happen if we want. And to find out, it's like any church or business, who will
We're losing you, Chris. Keep talking. Maybe the signal will pick up. You're important to this conversation. Because I want to ask Chris and whether anyone else on this meeting knows more about here.
Yeah, sorry about my internet.
Of course,
Sorry.
continue your comments.
So I would just, the letter, I think it's a great document that we need to move forward on. John Deere is a good friend of mine. He's one of the writers of this document, along with the Archbishop. And I think we were in place to create a moment where we as an interfaith group can say, oh, this is what our bishop said, our rabbi said, our imam said, we really support this. How can we help advance this? So
Good.
my fear is like, I hate to say this, but my fear is that the Archbishop, like any public people, they can write any of us off because we belong to an organization that they may not agree on some other issues. And so how do we strategically get there so that they would meet with us and hear the message? So.
Before I turn it back to Marcy, Chris, give us a little bit of insight on Archbishop Gomez. Many of us only know him from news stories. What do you believe his values are? Do you know him having spoken out on issues of peace and nuclear weapons in particular? Chris, are you still with us? That's tough. Because I would like to strategize by thinking of what kind of a leader and a person Archbishop Gomez is, and then tailor our approach to him in light of that. Hopefully, here Chris is coming back in again.
Am I on again?
Yes. Did you hear my question?
Yes. Well, the Archbishop and I know each other well, and he calls me by my first name. He's at that level. He trusts me at a level that I am honored by. An example would be, we have a gay and lesbian ministry in the Archdiocese, and I'm his point person. Nationally, because of that, the Archbishop is trained in a very orthodox, traditional way called Opus Dei, and it comes across on many issues in our church and in the public. So I don't agree with him on many things. I need to say that, but I respect him and we work together. We would need to, the example I would use is with our gay and lesbian ministry. If I bring Spanish-speaking parents into the room, it changes his heart. So I would say we bring in, when we meet, we bring in people who are directly affected by nuclear weapons. And
while we're waiting for him to come.
Please go right ahead, Marcy.
Okay, I think that's really helpful to know that that he needs to hear from people directly impacted, and I'm in touch with people who could probably help us bring people into the room who were in Japan, at the time of the bombing, or had relatives who were.
Chris, you're back with us. Marcy just made a point. Did you have any other thoughts in the midst of losing your signal?
I'm sorry about my internet. I think I said most of it. However, I can be an instrument to make a meeting happen, both with the Archbishop and the Archbishop Santa Fe. I want to be hopeful.
Well, you're vital to this. In the chat, our resourceful Anthony Manousis found Gomez supports nuclear abolition according to this article. It's in the chat. I don't know if you have access to the chat, Chris.
Yeah.
So that's a starting point, and any language from his statements of that kind that make it their way into our letter, our joint statement, maybe we'll start calling it, could be very useful. Marcy said when you were off that she can access families of victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to humanize the question. And of course, it's in the headlines this morning in one sense. So we have a hand with Michael.
I wanted to mention that a number of years ago, Mo Nishida, who some of you may know, he did speak about the Little Tokyo Manzanar run and was involved. There was an actual, there's not a peace flame, there's a Hiroshima peace flame. This is different. This was a Japanese family that kept an ember that was from the atomic bombing, and they kept it for many, many years as a flame. And then he was involved with actually a group of both Japanese and native people. He helped bring it across the border into the United States, and that flame was returned back to New Mexico and buried by indigenous people there to sort of close that cycle, because the uranium mining is mostly done on native land. So I think it would be interesting to incorporate both the Japanese and the indigenous people in this country who've been suffering from the atomic industry. And I do think that probably also leading with Catholics to, a Catholic archbishop probably makes sense. Although I agree, we're obviously an interfaith group, but I think if we can find, additional elements in the Catholic Church that, are working for this, it would be useful. I did want to point out what Marcy said earlier, that the United States has abrogated multiple anti-nuclear treaties, and at one time there was a very, very massive, nuclear freeze and ban the bomb movement in this country and internationally. And I think we need to think about what happened to that and how it can be revived. Thanks.
I have hands from Anthony and Ruby.
Yes. Do we have, can you send?
Ruby, it's Anthony first and then you.
Okay.
And Anthony, raise your volume a little if it's possible.
Can you hear me now? Is that better?
Yeah, just speak clearly.
Okay, great. So I did that quick check, which I always do when we lobby somebody to find out where they stand. So apparently Gomez has publicly said that he supports the Pope's call for nuclear abolition. That was in 2020, 2 years ago. But, times call for a renewed commitment, we could say. So first, thank him for that and point out that this statement by Wester has, raised public awareness about it. And also that given the crisis we're seeing in the Ukraine, it makes it very clear that we really need nuclear abolition. So to say this is the time to come out and really affirm what the Pope has been saying, what Wester says, would be, I think, an approach that would, I think, make more sense. And I love what Father Chris says, to find out who are the people who would have an influence on Gomez. We call that power mapping. Who are the people that he would listen to? And if we can find anyone that he would be more inclined to take seriously, that would be great. And maybe Gomez could tell us. He would probably know some people who would be ideal. I don't know, but that's my thoughts. I think this is an ideal time to get him to make a public statement that could get in the papers.
Excellent. We now have Ruby, Carol Francis, and Marcy.
Yes, I've got two things. One is, can we get a copy of that letter to our emails to send? And then the second thing, my interest is well, three things really. Peace has been for years, peace power, but it's bringing the young people in. And I'm thinking of the colleges and everything, and especially the young people that are getting ready to vote, maybe just turning 18, because they're so interested in this. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Bringing the schools in, all the high schools in Los Angeles, sending that out, just seeing if we can get the graduates, the ones that are getting ready to graduate in 20 ages.
Let me insert a question to Chris on this. Are there still Newman clubs? Those were the Newman Catholic clubs on college campuses. Are they active in Southern California?
They are, many of them are no longer called Newman, but there are Catholic groups at all the universities, yes.
I think that's a very good idea from Ruby and a way to broaden this. Next is Carol Francis. Please take your hand down if you've spoken already.
It's unmute. I want to echo what Michael said about not only getting youth, but getting those people that of our generation that are still, that were part of this immense movement of in the 80s. So I want to share a couple quotes from Gomez from the article that Anthony gave us. He called us to, quote, persevere in our efforts to abolish these weapons of mass destruction which threaten the existence of the human race and our planet, end of quote. And this one I really love. Remembering the violence and injustice of the past, may we commit ourselves to being peacemakers as Jesus Christ called us to be. I am less concerned what Chris said about he may not like some of the positions we've taken on other things. I think he might be, I'm hoping he would be impressed by the fact that we are interfaith, in that we do have people, if not every Friday morning with us, but we do have people that are part of our bigger community that are Muslim and Jewish. And that idea of building this as a Catholic-led interfaith outreach, I think would be good.
Thank you. Vida?
Yes, a couple of things. One, I'm thinking about church leaders. I don't know what the United Methodist Church official document says, but I'm pretty sure it's anti-nuclear weapons. But one of the people that we would want to include in this, I think, would be Reverend James Lawson. He would be perfect for that. The second thing is, responding to Ruby's suggestion, I know that at UCLA, in addition, of course, to the Catholic Center, there is a University Religious Conference interfaith group, and it's led by Jean Rose. And that would be a great place to tap in the young people. Thank you.
Thank you. As being pointed out in the chat, and we knew this earlier, Archbishop Gomez is chair of the U.S. conference. So the link, the persuading him to sign on is an immense connection nationally. And whatever, Chris, do you know anything about the protocol and process for the US conference to publicly take a position on something?
Uh, The Archbishop would need to bring it to what they call an executive committee, and they would review, and either they can issue a statement. Well, he can make a statement as his own. He can also get the executive committee to issue a statement, but the broader would be to bring it to the 480 some bishops that meet twice a year and have them, but that's an uphill battle and it's slow. So the most immediate would be the Archbishop and possibly to get an executive committee statement from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops.
Of course. You know,
Oh,
of
Steve,
course.
I just
I
want to say a
see.
couple of things.
Oh, yes, Marcy, please, you're the speaker.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I've heard so many fantastic ideas here. I think it's really helpful for us to strategize together. Given the urgency of the current situation with Russia and Ukraine, NATO, and so forth, I'm hopeful that perhaps Chris, Anthony, Mike, whoever wants to be involved, you know, in a real hands-on way, can craft an updated letter today, ready for circulation this weekend, to get perhaps more, to get some leaders of the interfaith community, others, you know, as you mentioned, James Lawson, to sign on, maybe Mimi Kennedy also, since she's Irish Catholic and, you know, star power helps. And then to ask for this meeting with Archbishop Gomez and hopefully get this meeting soon. And the requests, some of my requests would be that he use his influence as not just the Archbishop of Los Angeles, but as Mike pointed out, also the president of the Catholic bishops in the United States, to urge his members not to work in this field, to urge his archbishops to deliver sermons on the urgency of signing on to this treaty, of advancing, verifiable nuclear disarmament agreements, of using the Catholic Church's influence on Biden. He has an upcoming nuclear posture review he is expected to issue soon. I would think the current situation has delayed that somewhat, but it's an opportunity to influence that. And ultimately, maybe there could be a conference on nuclear abolition that's incorporated into this meeting that was just mentioned, I think the twice yearly meeting, but that's a longer range goal. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for structuring that. What I was doing today is giving as much space for everyone to ask questions, to make comments. Then toward the end of our meeting, we'll do exactly what you said. We will wrap this up into action items and the role that ICUJP will play, both short-term, mid-term, and long-term. So I'm eager for any for additional comments. I see Rose and then Nyabingi.
Yeah, this is probably too much out of left field, but while I was listening to this, I was thinking that the Roman Catholic Church has a tremendous presence in the States, but in view of what's going on right now, the Orthodox Church, we have a lot of people in Los Angeles who belong to various Orthodox churches. They're the people that have the influence and the power in Russia and Eastern Europe, where, you know, Ukraine is. And I just wondered if anybody's ever thought of reaching out to them and seeing if they have a position as well.
Just on that score, does anyone have any input or response?
Yes, that's what I was speaking about also, is getting the leaders, like in the Methodist Church or their conference, basic leaders, if we could get this letter out and, you know, have that meeting, even if we need to work together to restructure the letter. So that was one of the things too, involving all of the communities.
So to grab that, if Marcy's taking notes as well, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. I would imagine that anti-nuclear groups have cataloged faith positions on nuclear weapons. There are probably websites, lists, statements. So part of this process, so we don't reinvent the wheel, is to go back and catalog those so that they're part of one of these statements. Let's continue with Chris. You want to pick up on that?
Just I believe when you do that, all the main religions of the world have said no to nuclear weapons at some point. The point of the Archbishop's letter.
I think the nuclear industry is blocking Chris's signal.
You know, he always goes out right at the cliffhanger.
I'm sure he'll come back. Go ahead, Chris. Oh, I take your screen
pull out
off.
of the industry, and I get up in my pulpit, whatever that pulpit is. It's when a rabbi or it's okay. I'll do that again. So I'll try this again. Is this working?
Yes.
Yes.
So the difference is statements have been made by, I think, every church against nuclear weapons. The challenge of the Archbishop's letter is to say no to the building, the industrial complex. So I can make a statement that we're against nuclear weapons, but if 50% of my congregation work at a place and they raise money from that place, then that's when this message is unique in that regard, that it's painful in that regard. Anyway.
Look, that's very important. It's in the chat. And I think we got to put on our list in Southern California, the industries that profit from nuclear weapons. That list may exist somewhere. Others may have done that research. Then we need to target those communities. And we have to find a supportive way to talk to, perhaps to unions, it's the same question of transitioning from military bases to community-based use of facilities. We have to wean ourselves off of nuclear weapons, even if and retrain employees and workers in that process. So I think there is even more homework. It isn't just writing a letter, it is some deep organizing into on the industrial side, especially in Southern California, where I'm sure it exists. And we have to be very strategic about that. And Marcy's put in that Catholic Church divested from largest nuclear weapons companies such as Northrop and Grumman. She asked that question. So let's continue the dialogue. Nyabingi?
Yes, I had a question for Father Chris. Have you spoken with the Archbishop about this before?
I have not spoken to him since the Archbishop documents come out.
Okay. The reason I asked
about the issue before, but not since.
Oh, so what? I'm sorry to cut you. So what did he say when you spoke to him about the issue?
Oh, he's opposed to nuclear weapons. He's with the bishops of our church. But as I was just the challenge is El Segundo is like Santa Fe, New Mexico. And if you're a pastor or a rabbi or whatever in El Segundo, it's really difficult to say it's immoral, all the words that we agree with, to be part of the nuclear industrial complex when my brother and my mother, my cousin all works, and that's how they pay for their school kids. And so so I can say it here in East LA because there's nothing here in East LA that builds nuclear weapons as far as I know. But in El Segundo or in other places like Santa Fe, New Mexico, that's the heart of the nuclear place. So I appreciate all the concerns that are being raised, and we need to figure out how to.
Yeah,
right.
I think you need to cut your video off. That would stop.
The video.
Yeah. So the reason I asked that is because it doesn't sound like it would be a heavy lift to get a meeting with the Archbishop. You know, we have limited capacity to do this work. So I'm always looking for the easiest way to accomplish what we need to accomplish. And it's the Archbishop's job to meet with the public. So I feel like we're trying to meet with an elected official, or, you know, it should be an easy lift to get a meeting with him on this.
Let me continue with input, both in the chat. Please check out what Michael's putting in, and I've got Carol Francis and then Dave Clennon.
Right.
Marcy. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, that's a really good point about El Segundo. One of the parts of the movement in the freeze, the nuclear arms freeze, nuclear weapons freeze of the 80s, was a movement for conversion, in which they would get together communities where there's heavy nuclear factories and say, what does your community need? How can your skills that you use for whatever you do with the nuclear industry, how could those skills, with some retraining that whatever, how can we convert this factory? Not shut it down and leave you unemployed. How can we convert it to something that you in this community have decided as a group, as a community, that you would like to convert this factory into? And I think just working that into our letter is very important. Encourage priests to say, you know, we're going to have a meeting where you're going to talk about what you would like to convert these military factories in El Segundo into.
Thank you. Dave.
Thank you. Just a question for Nyabinghi or Marcy or Father Chris. Has there been any official response to the Archbishop of Santa Fe's letter? Has there been any official response from individual or groups of corporations involved in the making of nuclear weapons or the means of delivering nuclear weapons? Thank you.
I've not seen any, but it would be a good thing to refer to, but there are major companies there in Santa Fe, so I can assume that there will be, but I have not seen anything.
Do our speakers have any information on that?
No, I don't.
All right. Remember that Chris mentioned checking in with Father John Deere, so we're fully up to date on the impact of the Archbishop's efforts, and we are current on all that as we make our effort locally. I wanted to, if only we had a veteran organizer of 40 years experience in Southern California here, Marcy, how would you stage the planning of targeting industries in El Segundo and mapping the power there and employees and unions and the like?
Well, that's probably a larger question than, and I think it's certainly a worthy, important question, and I want to talk to that. But if before we do that, if we could just set a plan, you know, I mean, if we're at that point where we could say, okay, we're going to have a timeline, we're going to do, you know, update this letter, we're going to ask people to sign on, and we're going to ask next week for a meeting. I would feel, you know, gratified leaving this meeting knowing that we had a very concrete plan to, and given the urgency of the moment. On the
Sure.
question of divestment, you know, I think mapping out the anti-war organizations in the South Bay and getting them involved would be critical, and asking for meetings with some of the unions that represent these workers, like the machinists union. What are they doing to urge conversion? Probably very little. But, you know, of course, it's support and it's pressure. And again, you know, there's a way, if there's a way to find other jobs, and as Carol Francis mentioned, hold a community meeting to engage those who live there and what they would prefer to see their energies invested in, and go from there. I think that would be very important.
So we have about a half hour left in this meeting, and I'll now speak directly to Marcy's. So we have, today we are forming the ICUJP subcommittee on nuclear disarmament. And the elements of that effort from our standpoint are Chris Panett, liaisoning with you, Marcy, and Nyabingi. Chris put in the chat, despite his access, that he will connect with Father John and Archbishop of Santa Fe today to get that kind of update from their standpoint. Depending on everyone's capacity, today is Friday, I would encourage the three of you initially, or anyone who wants to volunteer now, to look, I think, at two things. I think this, the threat in the Ukraine puts nuclear power and nuclear threats in the headlines. So Marcy, you earlier mentioned you could update the current letter to kind of put that in the headline. I think I'd love to see a joint ICUJP, Code Pink, and any other organizations we can immediately call on for a statement over this weekend as our initial statement on this. Then with Chris working behind the scenes, I agree with something Nyabingi said, which is this could take a phone call or a conversation between Chris and Archbishop Gomez, and it may not be a heavy lift depending on how it's framed. So we often think in terms of organizing a delegation, arranging a meeting. There are all the COVID problems of arranging a meeting. And if Chris is still listening, maybe those early phone calls today can just get the temperature of Archbishop Gomez. He must know of John Wester's statement and full report. And maybe a piece of this is easier than we think, because if the Archbishop is on our side, then the larger question of framing it in terms of the industry in El Segundo and the unions, that will begin to fall into place. So that's my sense. And I know you're organizing thinking, Marcy, is always proactive. Where do we go next? What are the action items? So I do think it's a possible short-term statement over the weekend. Our board of directors is committed to this issue. So as long as you finally check in with me, we can approve a statement. I like this notion of having signers. Any organizations that either speaker can bring into that statement would be helpful. Then it's Chris reaching out to John Deere and John Wester. And Chris is giving us a thumbs up, which is very helpful. So I think that's a working plan. We can do a lot of this during the week by email. When we reconvene at our meeting next week, on the 11th, this Friday forum, we can carve out with our speaker for that day some time to update everyone and see where we are on this. So that's generally my organizing approach to this. Marcy,
I'm sorry.
Marcy, and then Michael.
Just a clarifying question.
I was saying Fernando has a hand up.
Right. I'll get to him too.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you just on this piece, Marcy.
So you're suggesting that Father Chris call the Archbishop first and see if we can
get updated from Santa Fe so he's current. There might be other headlines. He can be informational and helpful to Archbishop Gomez by passing on additional and new information. And then I think I saw Chris's thumb up on that. Fernando.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank all of you in working on these issues. Really, this is a urgent issue. I agree that everything that you're planning to do is good. But if we can also inject, what the historical uh, condition or how it becomes like this today, because it's like I felt that we're acting always palliative. I mean, how do you call that? But anyhow, we have to also examine the how it becomes what it is today. Because it's like we have to have a healthy discussion in terms of why Russia has invade Ukraine. As far as I know, is that Gorbachev also, when they folded the Soviet Union, they also have an agreement, the Minsk agreement was a part of the agreement, and look like the United States has violated many of this agreement, and it's like what's happening in China. The U.S. knows that Taiwan and Hong Kong is part of China, and at the same time, you know, you know, it's triggering. The U.S. is triggering, or the imperialists is triggering many of these, problem with that area, and so we also have to have a courage to criticize our government, like the US government, for example, because, what did they do historically? They also increased the nuclear, the funding on nuclear weaponry, to advance the nuclear weaponry. So we have to really look at many of these aspects, because it's like I'm feeling that we're acting palliatively in many of this endeavor that we do. But anyhow, I just wanted to hopefully inject that to whatever letter, because some, the Russian are also asking that to have an agreement, a guarantee, before this invasion, that we must have some kind of security matter issues. But of course, when the U.S. also uh, have a coup d'etat in 1914, then that's another problem that escalate to what it is today. And so, but
Right.
anyhow, but hopefully that can be injected, to really work on the U.S. government, because it looked like the people here are well-meaning, and the government is not listening, and so forth. So the problem is
Right.
the United, well, as the love of money is really the problem here. Imperialism is really on the works. But anyhow, I wanted to conclude
Good.
that.
That's important, because any statement in all of this Ukraine situation, we've got to avoid a US triumphalism, as if the only nuclear threat comes from Russia.
Right.
We've already stated in this program that the US has abrogated nuclear treaties. And there's a risk right now, and I mean this in the anti-war movement and elsewhere, that we not treat Russia as the only aggressor, as the only country that violates international law. And I could expand on that, because the US Supreme Court yesterday allowed state secrets to hide the fact that we're torturing prisoners in CIA sites. So the US bears huge responsibilities in all of this, and we have to find a way that none of our statements appear to excuse. And we are based in the United States. Our target government is the United States government. So much of what we're talking about has to be framed in that way. Chris had to leave us. I think we're all immensely grateful to him. It's clear he will stay on this. I will be sure to link up emails so that Marcy and Nyabingi are connected to Chris by email. But we're getting other comments that this is a broader question beyond the Catholic Church, the World Council of Churches. We are ICUJP. Religious communities must stop blessing war and violence. And this question goes to the heart of our work. So I think we've been reinvigorated today. We have about 15 more minutes. Nyabingi.
Yes. So as I mentioned at the start, that I've been working very hard to bring some of the Black ministers in LA into the anti-war movement with very little success. And Steve, you have a lot of respect amongst these guys. Sauls, Smart, Pastor Q. I sent all of them letters asking them to endorse this. They didn't get back with me. So I want to work with you. I bet you if you contacted them and asked them to endorse it, they would. So that's something that I would like, that's an action item.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Those are people I work with all the time. So I see that, and Jim Lawson's been mentioned. I see that whole component. Michael mentioned indigenous peoples, the impact of these industries in vulnerable communities is very important. So that's on my list. Lucy.
I was wondering if it might be appropriate to send a letter of congratulations to the Orthodox churches that have decided to stop blessing nukes. That would be reaching out globally. And I'm not sure if there's special protocols or anything, but they're discussing, I guess, or maybe they've completed their process of ending the ritual of blessing nukes, it says in the chat I just read. Thank you.
Right.
Letter of congratulations to them. My idea, just an idea.
Yeah. Other comments in the chat. I had a private one, Veterans for Peace as a possible collaborative partner. Do we know the Bishop of Washington, D.C.? Is that who could speak directly to the president? Yeah, I think we have to have a component on this. We have a devout Catholic president, and everyone beats up on him when he has positions on the death penalty and abortion. We need to bring him to the table on nuclear weapons. There's also comments. Marcy is saying she'll update the letter, forward to Chris. Veterans for Peace signed on as an endorser of the letter I wrote with ICUJP as an endorser also. So that's already happening. Positions for Social Responsibility. Marcy, did that working letter, you've mentioned a couple organizations. How are there other signers on? You're on mute.
Yes, I'll read them, and I just checked. There are additional ones that I'm not going to read that I haven't checked yet, but ICUJP, World Beyond War, Veterans for Peace, Peace Action, excuse me, Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space, MLK Coalition of Greater Los Angeles, Veterans for Peace, Chapter 7, Los Angeles, Jewish Voice for Peace, LA Jews for Peace, Topanga Peace Alliance, Progressive Democrats of America, Roots Action, Veterans for Peace, The Villages, Florida, World Beyond War, Central Florida, San Diego Climate Mobilization Coalition, Environmentalists Against War.
Terrific. So that's already a broad base. Yeah. Michael.
Yeah, I noticed in the chat that Lenore mentioned PSR, Physicians for Social Responsibility, because they've done a lot of anti-nuclear stuff. I was going to say that in relation to Fernando's point that the U.S. has committed to modernizing its nuclear forces at multi-billion-dollar expenditures, and if we're talking about finding alternatives for the people employed in that industry, that money should be turned into, something else to, provide meaningful work at denuclearizing and decontaminating and all the rest of it. So I think that would be something to raise, they passed nearly $1 trillion in 1 year for military if you add in the CIA, and they couldn't get 1.7 trillion in 10 years for social welfare. So
Yes.
I'll just
Lucy?
jump in and say that our last week we had talking about HR 2021 S87, which is supposed to provide funding for alternative, not greenhouse gas based. And maybe we could dovetail the nuclear with no greenhouse based, because if that money is not spent yet, just a way of retooling it maybe to be less greenhouse. Yeah, problematic, because if it's going to be a lot of greenhouse gases.
Right.
Blow off a nuclear bomb. All right, let me get out of here.
Oh, good. I see Carol Francis's comment. On the next iteration, Marcy, send me the letter, and I'll reach out to Salam Al-Mariyati at MPAC and Hussam at CARE, so we have Muslim representation in these lists. Anyone else who sees this letter, please solicit your own organizations and congregations to sign on. Carol Francis points out the war is environmentally destructive. Yes, and nuclear war is particularly annoying when it comes
To the environment.
when it comes to the environment. So we've got a few more minutes. Any other? Yes, Carol Francis.
You're on mute.
Yeah, you're muted, Carol Francis.
Where's the letter? Is it in the chat? Is it on our emails?
See, let's see if I can, sometimes I bounce myself off of these things when I try to do something like this. I will try to post the letter.
Right, and we'll definitely circulate it on email as well.
But again, it needs to be updated, It needs to
No,
be
it's just the current draft.
Yeah.
So everyone sees it, and it helps get signers and knowing that it may be revised. Phil Way.
I was just gonna comment on your beautiful understatement about how annoying nuclear war is. And it reminded me of a bumper sticker that was on a car I inherited from my father that said, "One nuclear war can ruin your whole day."
Yeah.
Yeah, it is the solace of dark humor on such a devastating issue. Marcy, Code Pink is all in on this. They'll be supportive. They'll use their social media.
Yes, okay. I'm posting just parts of the letter at a time because it's the best I can do here. So it's a little truncated, but you'll see the essence of the letter.
Yeah, I don't know. Nyabingi, are you any more adept at doing a link?
Well, here it's in the chat. It's
that's the link?
No, that's not the link. That's the letter itself.
No, I know that, but that's hard to scroll.
Oh, the link. Okay, the link. Yes, the link. Here we go. All right.
Steve, if she could email the letter to you, then possibly you could email it.
Here's the.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
No, we'll do this in. So first of all, for people, for people adept, it's in the link. The link is in the chat right now. If anybody wants to grab it before the end of the meeting. Clearly, all of you will be getting more on this on our discuss list and board list. I'm using this meeting, looking at all the board members to assume a consensus on our full support in all of the aspects that we're talking about today. And there is John Wester's letter again directly. and the list of organizations. Marcy, in your comings and goings, sometimes the nuclear question is not on the top of progressives' thinking. We're so involved in so many other issues. How do you think we can talk to our friends about these issues and really alert them to the urgency of it?
I think now is an opportune time, given the threat of nuclear war, a nuclear showdown, and with Putin placing his nuclear arsenal on we have our weapons on on high alert, and issuing veiled threats to use nuclear weapons. We need to inform people that the United States has abrogated 3 treaties, as Michael mentioned, and I mentioned earlier, since Bush, and that it's of urgent concern that we push to rejoin these treaties. And right now it's particularly difficult because very few people have faith in the leadership of Russia right now to listen to any kind of reason. But that does not mean that we should not be reasonable, right?
Right. Nyabingi, do you have a few closing thoughts and remarks?
Well, I'm fired up, man. Let's do this.
Yeah, let's do it. I'll work on this letter.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that ICUJP has sustained all this time that we have this platform, because there wasn't any other organizations that I could go to get this far on this. So I just wanted to thank you all for keeping it going.
Well, we're grateful to you guys for your sustained effort and keeping us on track. The challenge of a broad mission like ending war and violence is we have so many issues that come to us. But when we have the kind of strategic, intelligent support from people like yourselves, we had our wonderful resource with Chris right within our own circle. Then we're eager to move on these things. We are not just a debating society, and we see ourselves as taking direct action on this. So we'll follow up in all of the ways we've talked about. I wanted to do 2 things by way of introducing or letting Susan Stauffer introduce herself, and ask Susan if she could frame a closing prayer after our circle.
Sure, I could do that. And I'm Susan Stauffer, the Director of SOLA Community Peace Center and on the board of ICJP. Good to see you all, even if it's just every other week now with grandkid drop-offs.
Look, we are grateful. So this is a time when we kind of open. We used to do this holding hands at Emmanuel Presbyterian. Maybe we'll be doing that again later this year, who knows? But it is an opportunity to calm ourselves from these extraordinarily demanding issues that we've been discussing all morning. Energized by the notion that we are not leaving anything on the table, and we are going to move on this issue and other issues, recognizing that all of you are invited to stay on after a short break at 9:30 to keep the anti-racist network work going. And in that spirit, we open this circle to allow people to lift up family, friends, colleagues, a wider scope of people who are struggling. And in this circle, I'll be the first to lift up the people of Ukraine, innocent civilians, people with images we never thought we would see in our lifetimes again. And I want to lift up, I wish I had gotten her name by now, an elderly woman in Moscow who drew some handwritten signs to protest what her leader, Putin, was doing. And she came peacefully to a demonstration. The image could have been Pershing Square, it could have been Wilshire Boulevard, it could have been any place in the United States or around the world where people of conscience speak truth to power. And that elderly woman did that. She was arrested. We've heard of upwards of 5,000 protesters in Russia being detained and arrested. The vibrancy of that protest movement is dynamic. You can only imagine it in an authoritarian system, the courage that that takes. So as a starter, I'm lifting up those people of peace in Russia, the people of Ukraine, and people around the world who are insistent to not countenance this kind of war and destruction. And I leave the space open for others to lift up anyone they want. Michael.
On a personal note, I want to lift up my friend and comrade Lawrence Reyes, who has been suffering some additional medical issues. He has to have a IV antibiotic drip for the rest of the month. He's so just keep him in your thoughts and prayers. I also wanted to lift up the Little Tokyo de Manzanar Spirit Runners. I have not been able to get out to any part of it yet this year. It's elongated again. They started on February 19th, and they'll be going probably into the April in pieces. But the runners carry with them a scroll from atomic bomb survivors in the United States from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, praying for peace on Earth. And I think they're, connect again, as I say, the issues of, the nuclear bombing, Fukushima, and the, impact of the nuclear industry on indigenous people, where all the camps were put on indigenous land. I did want to say, not to minimize what's happening in Ukraine, but I've also shared with people statements from Palestinians and others about the fact that Palestine has been, subjected to the same kind of bombing and attacks that we're seeing in the Ukraine, and the world has not responded the way they have to Ukraine. The same thing with Yemen and the U.S. role in, allowing the Saudis to attack, a huge humanitarian crisis there, and in the same weeks that these attacks have happened, the U.S. Sent drone bombs into Somalia, and Israel bombed Syria. So I think that this is a global phenomenon of the use of violence to attack civilian populations, and it's crimes against humanity on every corner. Thank you.
Here,
Thank you.
Jasmine.
The family of James, attorney and minister James Sasson, who had released his physical body, and the services in San Diego next week on the 11th. But also, I'd like to lift up peace in the world, patient energy, attitude change, exercise, that this world can come in all religions, all nationalities, all colors, and know that they can release these atomic bombs and all that this loving spirit, Steve, our leader, has said. Yes.
Okay. I would like to uplift the caregivers and the mothers and the refugees around the world, but specifically Ukraine and Russia, and the water keepers, Lydia from our meeting. We keep her in mind, and indigenous families, indigenous people around the world that are that are out of our narratives, that are being left out. We should really lift them up and give them a piece, some thought and prayer. I do really appreciate all of your support, and I just lift them up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jasmine. We have Dave, Anthony, and Carol Francis.
I'd just like to say that we can't control the leadership of Russia or Ukraine or the members of the European Union. But I do hope, and I hope others share my hope, that leaders in the United States, the White House, the State Department, Congress, will show creativity, humanity, and empathy to a greater degree than they have so far. We need them to make peace. In order for us to achieve peace, we need our own leaders to step forward and take different actions, because what they have done so far does not appear to be working. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. Anthony and Fernando.
Yes, this week I read a very moving letter by a Russian Quaker named Boris Fetyukin, condemning the war, praying for the people of the Ukraine, calling on all of us to cast out war from our hearts. It was an amazing letter, and I'd like you to hold him and others who are peace-loving Russians. There are apparently 6,000 who've been arrested on peace demonstrations in Russia. So hold in your prayers those who have the courage to stand for peace in Russia and in the Ukraine, people who are resisting nonviolently the forces of the army and the military. So let's hold our brothers and sisters who are working for peace in Russia and the Ukraine in our prayers.
Fernando.
Yes, I wanted to lift up the people of Japan, because they are victims of this nuclear, we can say Holocaust, because it's really, this is really a very dangerous bomb, and it's good that we're doing it. But secondly, maybe really go inside to the heart of the ruling class here, because simply we're doing many of this work, but at the same time, they're not really listening. And hopefully I wanted to lift up, even the people in Congress, the people in Senate, that this is not a joking matter. This is really a serious bomb. And as a Christian, they warn us about this, the love of money is really, that's why you're not going to heaven, because simply, this love of money, which is happening now, that so much spending on this nuclear bomb and on wars and so forth. And it will really demise us as a human being in this planet Earth, And so I wanted to lift them up, the one that really have to really listen to this, because and hopefully we also listen to not be judgmental, but to really listen to the Russian people, what they're, or the Chinese people, as they said, Taiwan, Hong Kong is part of China, and we cannot do that. And when you're putting so much arm in Taiwan, it creates disability in their region because of the threat of this, like what's happening now in Ukraine. So I want to lift them up.
Thank you, Fernando. I wanted to leave space for anyone else who wants to lift up someone.
Let's lift up the land, the earth, and the animals for what they're going through.
Thank you. So if you'll take your hands down, if they were lifted previously, we will turn to Susan Stauffer.
Let's join ourselves together in a spirit of peace and prayer. Loving God, we come together this morning. We've had time to share and talk and strategize to create the beloved kingdom of peace that we know belongs on this earth, that we fall so far short of. We come together with anguish in our hearts for all the places that are being torn apart by the violence that we continue to harbor and perpetrate in our own hearts, in our own communities, in our world. We come together this morning asking that we can feel once again the power of your peace, that we can be filled up with it, that we can hold on to the justice which is woven into the fabric of the universe, that we can be the people on the ground who unite to say no more war, no more violence, no more nuclear, that the political leaders we know cannot not create their wars and their policies without our cooperation. So we pledge ourselves to not cooperate non-violently and to love each other because we are the same, because we are all living creatures on this earth, people and plants and animals together, creating and loving and able to produce the peace that we need, that the world needs. Fill us with this hope. Let us go forth in love and determination to recommit ourselves to this world, to this vision. In the name of all that is holy and just and peaceful, we cry out, no more war. Amen.
No more war. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Susan. Remarkable. Those thoughts are so uppermost in your mind. Thank you, everyone. Please be with us next Friday. I want to thank both of our speakers, and on a continuing basis, you are now fully card-carrying members of ICUJP. Please join us at all of our meetings. And I would be derelict.
Yeah, please welcome to stay on also today after for the
right.
ending systemic racism. We'll take a short break.
Right.
But we'll keep this open.
I'd be derelict not to ask for your financial support. There's a link in the invitation that brought you here today. We need that support to support our small staff and our expenses, and we are grateful for everything that you donate. Be well and be safe in this week forward. And as Michael just said, it will take about 5 minutes, close to 9:40 or so, and to reconvene the working groups. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.